They say you never know when it's your last night on Earth. If I had known, maybe I would have walked a little faster. Maybe I would have locked the doors the second I closed the shop. Maybe I wouldn't have stopped to tie my shoe under the dim glow of the street lamp, feeling the cold wind slip under my collar like a whispered warning. But I didn't know. And that's the cruelest part of it all. The night was quiet in Blackwood, the kind of silence that settles deep into your bones. My boots echoed against the cracked pavement, the only sound in the empty streets. The butcher shop sat on the corner of Main and Oak, its window display cleaned and emptied for the night, the scent of raw meat still clinging to my hands no matter how hard I scrubbed. I was used to the smell. It followed me home like a stray dog, slipping under my fingernails, buried deep in my pores. I shifted my bag onto my shoulder, adjusting my coat against the chill. The streetlights flickered. It had been happening all week, just a small thing, nothing worth thinking about. But tonight, it felt different. The air felt heavier. The wind had stopped. Everything had stopped. I turned the corner onto Oak Street. That's when I saw him. A man stood at the end of the block, half hidden in shadow. He wasn't moving, wasn't walking, just standing there, still as a statue, watching. My breath hitched, but I forced myself to keep walking. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just a drunk who had wandered too far from the bar. But something about the way he stood, shoulders square, head slightly tilted, made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. I kept my head down, gripping my bag tighter, trying to ignore the creeping unease curling in my stomach. But as I passed under the next street lamp, the light flickered out, swallowing me in darkness for half a second. When it buzzed back on, the man was gone. I swallowed hard. Just keep walking. Home wasn't far. A few more blocks, a few more minutes. A sound broke the silence. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, matching mine. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned my head slightly, heart hammering. Nothing. The street was empty. The man was gone. But I knew, deep in my gut, that I wasn't alone. I started walking again, faster now, my breath coming quick and sharp. The footsteps followed. Closer. Louder. My fingers fumbled in my pocket for my keys. Just one more block. Just one more turn. A shadow moved in the alley beside me. A whisper of fabric. A sharp metallic scent. I didn't have time to scream. I felt it before I saw it. The presence behind me. The shift in the air. The way the darkness seemed to deepen as if something had stepped out of the night itself. My fingers fumbled desperately with my keys, slick with sweat despite the cold, my breath turning to shallow gasps as I tried to force myself to move faster, to run, to do anything but stand frozen like a fool in the middle of the sidewalk. But it was too late. A hand clamped over my mouth, rough and calloused, pressing down hard enough that my lips ground against my teeth. Another arm snaked around my chest, yanking me backward with terrifying strength, my feet kicking uselessly against the pavement as I was dragged into the alleyway, into the waiting shadows. My bag slipped from my shoulder, landing with a dull thud on the wet ground. And for one desperate second, I thought about fighting, about kicking, about twisting myself free and sprinting toward the safety of the streetlights. But then I felt the cold press of a blade against my ribs, and every inch of my body went still. The grip around me tightened, pulling me deeper into the darkness, away from the prying eyes of the empty street. My heart slammed against my ribs, a wild, frantic beat that seemed to echo in the still night. The alley smelled of rot, of damp brick, of something metallic beneath it all, a scent I knew too well from years behind the butcher's counter. Hot breath brushed against my ear as a voice whispered, low and calm, almost gentle, as if soothing a frightened animal. "Don't fight. It'll only make it worse." I wanted to scream, but the hand over my mouth only pressed harder, forcing my jaw shut, my lungs burning with panic. My mind raced, trying to process, to understand. Was this a robbery? Some random attack? But no. There was nothing rushed about this, nothing desperate or unplanned. This was something worse. My body jerked as I was shoved forward, stumbling over uneven pavement, my shoulders slamming against the rough brick wall. The knife never left my side, its tip teasing the fabric of my coat, pressing just enough to remind me it was there, to let me know how easily it could slip beneath my skin if I made a wrong move. A car passed by the mouth of the alley, its headlights flashing for the briefest second, illuminating the walls, the dumpster, the damp ground beneath my feet. I wanted to lunge toward it, to throw myself into the open, to wave my arms and scream for help, but the grip on me never loosened, and before I could so much as shift my weight, I was yanked backward, deeper still, swallowed whole by the dark. My captor moved with purpose, dragging me toward something at the end of the alley, something I couldn't see, couldn't prepare for. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything but the quiet, steady hum of his breathing, the measured steps of his boots against the pavement, the slow, careful way he maneuvered me like a puppet in his grasp. And then I saw it. A door. Old, wooden, barely visible in the dim light, set into the side of a building I had never paid attention to before. He reached out, his free hand slipping into his pocket, pulling out a key, sliding it into the lock with practiced ease. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but blackness beyond, a yawning void that smelled of damp earth and something else, something sour and wrong. I tried one last time to resist, planting my feet, twisting my body, but the knife pressed harder, a warning, a promise, and before I could think, before I could even breathe, I was shoved forward, my own momentum sending me stumbling over the threshold into the waiting dark. The door slammed shut behind me, sealing me inside. The darkness swallowed me whole, thick and absolute, pressing against my skin like something alive, something waiting. The air was colder here, damp and heavy with a scent I couldn't place at first, something metallic and sharp, something that curled in the back of my throat and refused to leave. My breathing came in short, panicked bursts, each one too loud in the suffocating silence, and for a long moment, I just stood there, my body rigid, my mind screaming at me to move, to do something, anything. But then I heard it. The slow, deliberate click of the lock turning behind me. I spun around, my hands searching blindly in the dark, but before I could reach the door, the light flared on, sudden and blinding, burning into my retinas and forcing me to squeeze my eyes shut. When I opened them again, I wished I hadn't. The room wasn't large, just a basement by the look of it. The walls made of rough concrete, the floor uneven, cracked in places. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, its weak yellow glow casting long shadows that flickered and shifted with every movement. The scent in the air was stronger now, seeping into my lungs with each breath. And as my eyes adjusted, I saw why. There were hooks along the far wall, the kind I used in my own shop. Heavy metal things designed to hold weight, their surfaces slick and stained. Beneath them, the floor was dark, smeared with something I didn't want to name, something that made my stomach turn. I stepped back, my heel catching on something soft, something that gave under my weight with a sickening squelch. My gaze dropped, and my breath hitched in my throat. A piece of cloth torn and soaked through, lying half buried in the grime. It wasn't mine. A sound came from the corner of the room, something small, barely there, a shift in the air, the scrape of fabric against concrete. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I turned, my hands curling into fists even though I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be able to fight my way out of this. And then I saw him. He stood near a wooden table, his hands resting lightly on the surface, fingers splayed, his head tilted just slightly as he watched me. He wasn't a large man, not in the way you'd expect a predator to be, but there was something about him, something in the way he held himself, calm, patient, like he had all the time in the world. His eyes, dark and unreadable, traced over me as if he were sizing me up, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost kind. "You shouldn't have fought." My mouth was dry, my throat tight, but I forced myself to speak, to push past the fear clawing at my insides. "What do you want?" He smiled, a slow, creeping thing that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You work with meat, don't you, James?" My name in his mouth felt wrong, felt like something stolen, something tainted. I didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there as he straightened, wiping his hands on the stained apron he wore over his clothes, an apron so much like my own that for a second the room tilted, everything shifting into something too familiar, too real. "I do too," he continued, his tone light, conversational, as if we were standing in my shop, discussing cuts of beef as if this was normal. Or at least I used to, before they shut me down. His fingers traced absently over the handle of a knife resting on the table, the kind I kept in my own store, sharp and well-worn, used to cut through flesh and bone with practiced ease. "You see, James, people like us, and we understand things others don't. The way muscle works, the way sinew holds together, the way the body can be broken down, piece by piece." My stomach churned, nausea creeping up my throat, but I forced myself to stay still, to keep my face blank even as every instinct screamed at me to run. He took a step closer, slow, measured, the knife still resting in his hand. "But not everyone deserves to be whole, James. Some people are rotten, diseased. You've seen it, haven't you? The way meat can turn, the way it spoils if you let it sit too long." I swallowed hard, my mind racing, trying to make sense of his words, trying to understand what he wanted from me. "I don't. You do." His voice was sharper now, his eyes gleaming with something feverish, something hungry. "You know the difference between clean and unclean, between what should stay and what should be removed." He was closer now, close enough that I could see the fine lines on his face, the way his fingers twitched slightly against the handle of the knife. "I'm doing what needs to be done, James. What you're too blind to see. I'm fixing things." The blade lifted, catching the light, and I felt my breath stutter, my body coiled tight, waiting for the inevitable. "You're going to help me," he said. And then he smiled, and the light above us flickered, buzzing like a trapped fly in the silence. I stood frozen, my mind screaming at me to move, to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there like an animal waiting for slaughter. The knife in his hand gleamed under the dim, flickering light, the blade long and sharp, the kind I had used 1,000 times before in my own shop, cutting through fat and gristle with practiced precision. But this wasn't a shop, and I wasn't behind the counter, and this wasn't meat lying across the table. This was me. He took another step closer, the knife held loosely at his side, his free hand still resting on the table as if he had all the time in the world, as if he wasn't worried about me lunging, about me trying to fight back. He wasn't worried because he knew. He knew the moment he had pressed that blade to my ribs in the alley. He knew the second he had dragged me through that door. He knew that fear had already done most of the work for him. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my heart slamming against my ribs, each beat echoing in my skull like the ticking of a clock counting down. He watched me, his expression unreadable, his head tilting just slightly as if he were studying me, waiting for something. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice smooth, almost soothing, the way a father might speak to a child. "You of all people should understand. This is just a process, a necessary step in keeping things clean." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, grounding myself in the pain, in the sharp bite of reality. I forced my voice to come out steady, even though my chest felt tight, even though my lungs were struggling to pull in enough air. "I don't know what you want from me." His smile was small, patient. "I want to teach you." He reached down, his fingers brushing over a second knife lying beside the first, its handle worn, the blade clean and sharp. He lifted it carefully, turning it over in his hands, his touch reverent, his expression thoughtful. You've worked with knives your whole life, he continued, his gaze flicking up to meet mine. You know how to cut, how to break things down. But do you know how to truly carve, James? Do you know how to strip away what's ruined and leave behind only what's pure? I shook my head, my stomach twisting, bile rising in my throat. You're insane. His expression didn't change. He simply sighed, as if disappointed, as if he had expected more from me. That's what they said about me too, you know. The inspectors, the people who shut me down, who said I was unfit to run my shop, that I wasn't clean enough, that my methods were excessive. He laughed, a quiet, bitter sound, his fingers tightening around the handle of the knife. But I know better. I know what needs to be done. And I think, deep down, you do too. He stepped back slightly, gesturing toward the table, toward the knives, toward the dark stains on the floor that hadn't yet dried. So let's begin, James. Let me show you how to cut the rot away. My body felt like it wasn't mine anymore. My limbs heavy, my mind struggling to process the words, the reality of what was happening. I could still feel the weight of the cold night outside, the dampness of the alley, the way my keys had slipped from my fingers just moments before my world had been swallowed by this place. I took a slow, careful step back, my eyes darting toward the door, but his own movement mirrored mine. A lazy, practiced step to the side, blocking my path. The knife still loose in his grip, but ready, always ready. There's no running, James, he said, his voice softer now, almost regretful. Not yet. Not until you understand. I didn't want to understand. I didn't want to know what he meant, what lesson he was trying to teach, what sickness had festered in his mind for so long that he believed this was right. But then he moved closer, the knife lifting slightly, a quiet, expectant look in his eyes. And I knew I didn't have a choice. The knife was in my hand before I could process what was happening, its weight settling into my palm like something inevitable, something final. I hadn't reached for it, hadn't wanted to take it, but somehow it was there, cold and familiar. The wooden handle worn smooth from years of use, from fingers gripping it just like mine were now. Across the table, Henry Blackwood watched me, his expression calm, expectant, like a teacher waiting for his student to follow the first instruction. My fingers curled tighter around the handle, the leather of my palm damp with sweat, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The room seemed smaller now, the walls pressing in, the light above us flickering in a slow, sick rhythm. The smell of the place was thick and cloying, metallic and sour, creeping into my lungs with every shallow breath. I wanted to drop the knife, wanted to let it clatter to the table, to tell him I wouldn't do whatever twisted thing he had planned, but I didn't. I didn't move. Henry's eyes flicked down to the blade in my hand, then back to my face, a slow, satisfied nod following. Good, he said quietly, the approval in his voice making my stomach churn. You see, James, that's the hardest part. The first cut. Once you understand its purpose, the rest becomes easy. I swallowed, my throat tight, my fingers flexing around the knife. I'm not like you, I said, the words coming out weaker than I wanted, barely more than a whisper. Henry's smile was small, knowing. Not yet. He stepped to the side, reaching for something beneath the table, and before I could think, before I could prepare, he lifted a slab of raw meat and dropped it onto the wooden surface between us. The impact sent a dull, wet sound echoing through the room, the flesh pale under the yellow light, streaked with dark veins of red. It was animal meat, I could tell that much, but something about it felt wrong. The texture, the way the fat clung too thickly, the way it sagged unnaturally as it settled. He gestured toward it, his fingers brushing the air in a quiet command. Go on, he said. Cut. My stomach twisted, my head shaking before I could stop myself. No. His expression didn't change, didn't shift into anger or frustration, just remained patient, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. You will. I took a step back, the knife still clenched in my hand, the urge to run pressing hard against my ribs. But there was nowhere to go. Nothing but the locked door behind me and the unwavering presence of Henry Blackwood before me. "You don't understand yet?" he continued, tilting his head slightly. "But you will." And then, with slow, deliberate movements, he reached beneath the table again, his fingers closing around something else, something heavier, something that made my entire body go cold. A hand. Not a mannequin's hand, not a butcher's prop, but something real, something human. Its skin pale, lifeless, the fingers curled slightly as if frozen in the middle of reaching. He placed it beside the meat, the stark contrast making my vision blur, my mind struggle to accept what I was seeing. I staggered back, the bile rising in my throat, my legs shaking beneath me. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Henry sighed, his fingers pressing briefly to his temple as if I had disappointed him, as if this was nothing more than an expected hurdle. "Fear clouds judgment, James," he said softly. "You've spent your life cutting things apart, breaking them down to their purest form. But when it comes to this, you hesitate." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, my breath shallow, my hands shaking around the knife I still held. "You'll see in time," he continued, his voice almost gentle. "Once you make the first cut, it'll all make sense." The light above flickered again, buzzing like an insect trapped in a jar, and somewhere in the depths of the basement, something dripped, slow and steady like the ticking of a clock. Counting down. The air in the basement felt tighter, heavier, pressing down on my skin like something solid, something suffocating. My breath came shallow, my lungs barely working as my mind struggled to process what was in front of me. The severed hand, pale and lifeless, its fingers curled as if still clinging to something unseen. My grip on the knife tightened involuntarily, my knuckles aching from the pressure, but I couldn't bring myself to let go. I couldn't bring myself to move at all. Henry Blackwood watched me from across the table, his face calm, patient, the way a teacher watches a student struggle through the first step of a difficult lesson. He didn't speak right away, didn't push me, just let the silence settle between us like a thick, invisible fog. The basement smelled of blood, of something deeper, something rotten lurking beneath the metallic tang in the air. It clung to my throat, to my clothes, to my very skin, and I knew that even if I made it out of this place, I would never be rid of it. "You're hesitating," Henry said finally, his voice soft, almost understanding. "I expected that. It's natural, really, for someone untrained in this kind of work." His fingers drummed lightly against the wooden surface of the table, just beside the slab of raw meat, the rhythmic tapping a steady counterpoint to the flickering hum of the light bulb above us. "But hesitation is weakness," he continued, tilting his head slightly, his dark eyes never leaving mine. "You, of all people, should know that when it comes to the blade, there's no room for doubt. One wrong cut, one moment of hesitation, and the whole process falls apart." My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat, my hands sweating around the knife's handle. "I don't want to be part of this," I whispered, my voice hoarse, barely audible. Henry smiled then, a slow, creeping thing that never quite reached his eyes. "That's where you're wrong, James. You already are." He stepped around the table with deliberate slowness, his movements unhurried, controlled, his presence filling the space between us like a shadow stretching toward me. I wanted to back away, wanted to put as much distance as I could between us, but my feet felt rooted to the floor, as if the fear had settled into my bones, turned them to stone. He reached for my wrist, his grip firm but not violent, his fingers pressing just enough to make sure I felt the control, the quiet dominance beneath the calm exterior. "You've held a knife your entire life," he murmured, his voice almost soothing. "You know what it means to carve, to break down, to reshape something raw into something usable." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, just for a second, a brief pulse of strength that sent a warning through my skin. "This is no different." He continued, guiding my hand ever so slightly toward the table, toward the severed hand lying motionless beside the meat. Flesh is flesh, James. You know that. You've always known that. My breath hitched, my stomach twisting so violently I thought I might be sick. But he didn't let go, didn't give me the chance to escape. The knife in my hand trembled, the cold steel pressing against my own palm as if reminding me of what I held, of what I was capable of. Henry's voice dropped to a whisper, his lips barely moving. Cut. My fingers tensed around the handle, my muscles locking, my entire body rigid as I stared at the pale, lifeless hand in front of me. I couldn't do this. I wouldn't. But then his other hand moved, slow and deliberate, reaching for something on his belt, and before I could even process what was happening, I felt the cold press of another blade against the side of my throat. Not enough to break the skin, not yet, but enough to remind me of exactly where I was, exactly what he was capable of. My pulse pounded against the steel, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my vision blurring at the edges. Cut, Henry repeated, his voice steady, patient, as if there was no doubt in his mind that I would do what he asked. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure he was wrong. The light above us flickered again, casting long, shifting shadows across the basement walls, and the sound of something dripping in the darkness behind me seemed to grow louder, more insistent, like the ticking of a clock counting down the seconds of my resistance. I had to do something. I had to act. Because if I didn't, I knew the next piece of flesh on this table would be mine. The knife in my hand felt heavier than it should have, the weight of it pressing into my palm as if it were alive, as if it knew the decision that was about to be made. The cold edge of Henry Blackwood's blade sat just below my jaw, unmoving, patient, a silent promise of what would come if I didn't obey. The silence between us stretched impossibly long, broken only by the distant rhythmic dripping somewhere in the basement, a sound that had blended into the background of this nightmare, but now felt deafening. My breath came in uneven, shallow bursts, my chest rising and falling too quickly, my pulse hammering against my skin so hard I was sure he could feel it through the knife. Henry stood close, too close, his breath warm against my cheek, his grip firm on my wrist as he guided my hand toward the severed limb on the table. The pale fingers lay still, curled slightly, as if frozen mid-motion, like they had once reached for something and never made it. I tried to focus, tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that it was just another piece of butchered meat like the ones I had handled every day of my life. But my stomach churned violently, bile rising, my mind screaming at me that this was different. This was a person. This had once been someone's hand. Henry's voice came low, almost soothing, like a teacher correcting a hesitant student. Steady your grip, James. You know this part. You've done it 1,000 times before. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my fingers flexing instinctively around the handle. The urge to fight, to resist, to lash out and turn the knife against him was there, a fire burning beneath the fear. But the cold steel at my throat reminded me how little power I had in this moment. He was in control. He had been from the moment I stepped into that alley, from the second his hand had clamped over my mouth and dragged me into the dark. I could feel him watching me, studying me, waiting for that moment of surrender, the moment I would give in and accept what he was trying to teach. He truly believed this was a lesson, a revelation, as if this act would open my eyes to some twisted truth only he could see. But I wasn't like him. I never would be. My grip tightened. And then I moved. Not the way he expected, not the slow, obedient motion of a man following orders, but fast and sharp and desperate, my body twisting before he could react, the knife in my hand slashing upward, not toward the hand on the table, but toward the man who had put it there. Henry's eyes widened just slightly, the smallest flicker of surprise before the blade tore into the flesh of his arm, cutting deep, warm blood spilling onto my hand, onto the table, onto the severed limb below. He let out a sharp hiss, stepping back instinctively, and in that single second of hesitation, I wrenched myself free, my body lurching backward, my breath ragged as I stumbled toward the door. My hands fumbled for the lock, slick with sweat and blood. My vision blurred with panic as I struggled to force the bolt open. Behind me, Henry let out a slow, measured breath, the sound of fabric shifting, of a blade being lifted, of a predator preparing to strike again. "You disappoint me, James," he said, and there was no anger in his voice, only quiet, patient regret, like a father watching a son fail to learn a lesson. But that was expected. I didn't let him finish. The bolt gave, the door groaned as I yanked it open, and I ran. The basement stairs were uneven, slick with something I didn't want to name, my feet slipping as I forced myself upward, my body crashing against the narrow walls, each breath burning in my lungs as the stale air of the basement gave way to the colder night outside. The alley was empty, silent, the streetlights still flickering, casting long, broken shadows across the pavement. My heart pounded against my ribs, my legs shaking beneath me as I stumbled forward, my hand still clutching the bloodied knife, my skin still stained with something I could never wash away. I didn't stop running. Not when I reached the main road, not when I passed the shuttered storefronts of my quiet little town, not even when I saw the flashing red and blue lights in the distance, the faint echo of sirens breaking the silence of Blackwood. The police found me on my knees in the middle of the street, the knife still clenched in my shaking hands, my breath ragged and uneven, my body trembling so hard I thought I might shatter. I don't remember what I said to them, don't remember if I screamed or whispered or simply sat there in silence as they surrounded me, voices overlapping, hands grabbing my arms, lifting me to my feet. But I remember the way the officers looked at me when they followed the blood trail back to 12 Oak Street, when they descended into that basement and found what Henry Blackwood had left behind. They found the table, the knives, the stains on the floor. They found the hooks along the walls, the remnants of those who had come before me, the pieces of flesh that hadn't yet been disposed of. They found the severed hand, still resting on the wooden surface where I had left it. But they didn't find him. Henry Blackwood was gone. The town of Blackwood changed after that night. The butcher shop on Main Street never reopened. My wife couldn't look at me the same way again, no matter how many times I told her that I hadn't been one of them, that I hadn't given in, that I hadn't become what he wanted me to be. People whispered when they saw me, avoided my gaze, avoided my shop, avoided the street where it had all happened. And sometimes, late at night, when the streets are empty and the town is quiet, when the wind moves through the alleyways in that slow, deliberate way, I swear I can hear it. The steady dripping of something in the dark, the sound of a knife being sharpened, the whisper of a voice, patient, calm, waiting. "You'll understand one day, James. You'll see."